My son thought my 38 years as a senior escrow officer in Mansfield, Ohio, meant I only knew how to stamp papers, not read them. My name is Darlene. I'm 62, and when my only child demanded I forfeit my hard-earned pension to become his unpaid, full-time nanny, he made a critical mistake. He forgot that I know exactly where every single dollar of his $250,000 income is being wasted. The rain was tapping a steady, dreary rhythm against my kitchen window. The kind of cold October drizzle that makes the bones in your hands ache if you've spent 40 years working a keyboard. My younger sister, Brenda, was leaning against my laminate kitchen counter, her hands wrapped around a mug of Folgers. Brenda still drives a yellow school bus for the county, and she has the kind of sharp, no-nonsense eyes that can spot a kid throwing a spitball from 3 rows back through a rearview mirror. "They're coming here to ask for something big, Dar," Brenda said, her voice low as she watched the dark gray Audi Q7 pull into my cracked concrete driveway. "I can smell it from here. That car costs more than our father made in 3 years at the steel mill, and they're parking it under your rusted carport like they own the place." "Let them park, Brenda," I murmured, wiping down the oilcloth tablecloth with a damp dish towel. "They're family." Family or not, they've got that look," she muttered, slipping out the back door to give us privacy, though she promised she'd be back later to check on me. When the front door opened, the scent of expensive leather and French perfume immediately crowded out the cozy smell of the cinnamon tea I'd brewed. My son, Tyler, walked in first. At 34, he looked every bit the successful regional sales director. Sharp corporate haircut, a brand new Apple Watch gleaming on his wrist, and a Patagonia vest that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Behind him came Chloe, his wife. Her blonde highlights were immaculate. Her nails were a perfect shade of pale pink, and she carried a designer diaper bag that looked like it had never actually touched a dirty floor. My 14-month-old granddaughter, Lily, was strapped into a stroller, looking sleepy. The moment I saw her little face, my heart melted. But before I could even unbuckle her, Chloe slammed her heavy, double-walled designer water flask onto my table. The sharp clack echoed in the small kitchen, leaving a wet ring right on the hand-crocheted lace runner my mother had made for me when I got married. "We need to talk, Mom," Tyler said. He didn't offer a hug. He didn't ask how my arthritis was doing after the damp spell we'd been having. He just pulled out one of my vinyl-backed kitchen chairs, the metal legs scraping harshly against the yellowing linoleum. "Of course, Tyler," I said, sitting down opposite him. I folded my hands in my lap, rubbing my thumb over the dry, paper-cut scars on my knuckles. The permanent badge of honor from 38 years of handling thick legal folders, deeds, and title transfers. "Is everything okay? Is Lily feeling all right?" "Lily is fine," Chloe said, her voice tight-clipped and dripping with an artificial urgency. "But our financial situation is not. We've been running the numbers, Darlene, and we've reached a breaking point. The cost of living is out of control. We simply cannot afford the 5 days a week of high-end daycare Lily needs. It's draining us dry." I blinked, looking at my son. "Daycare? I thought you had her enrolled in that nice preschool program over by the country club." "We do," Tyler said, running a hand over his face. He looked genuinely exhausted, but it was the kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing status, not survival. "But it's nearly $2,000 a month, Mom. Plus, they expect tips for the staff, and there are activity fees, and look, it's just too much. We're living paycheck to paycheck. We've made a decision. We need you to retire early. Next month." The silence that followed was so heavy I could hear the old Frigidaire hum in the corner. "Retire early?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tyler, I'm 62. If I retire next month, 3 years before my full retirement age, my pension from the title company is slashed by 35%. I'll lose over $800 a month for the rest of my life. I won't have enough to cover the property taxes on this house once the 5-year reassessment hits." "It's only 3 years, Darlene," Chloe chimed in, leaning forward, her diamond wedding band catching the dull light from the ceiling fixture. "And you'd be helping your own granddaughter. Think of the bond you'll build with Lily. You're always saying you don't get enough time with her. This solves everything. You retire, you take Lily Monday through Friday from 7 to 6, and we save $24,000 a year." "And what about my lost income?" I asked, looking directly into my son's eyes. How do I make up for the $800 a month I'm giving up permanently? Are you planning to pay me a salary? Tyler looked down, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Well, Mom, we figured since you already own this house outright, and your expenses are so low. I mean, you don't really spend money on anything. You don't travel. We'd cover Lily's food, of course. But we're family. We didn't think you'd want to charge your own son to watch his child. I want to pause here and ask you something. If you've ever sat at a kitchen table with the people you poured your whole life into, the child you raised on cabbage soup and hand-me-down coats so he could go to a good college, only to realize they see you as a free utility bill to be shut off and turned on at their convenience. Did your heart squeeze up like a dried sponge? Because mine did, right then and there. When my husband Frank died of a sudden heart attack 30 years ago, there was no life insurance. I had to take the city bus to the county title office in the dead of winter because the alternator on our old Buick had died, and I couldn't afford the $120 to fix it. I wore the same navy blue winter coat for 7 years. I did all of that, so Tyler would never feel the cold pinch of poverty. I paid for his state college tuition by working Saturday mornings at a local tax prep office, filing returns for truck drivers and construction workers. And now, here he was, sitting in my kitchen in a $400 jacket, asking me to bleed myself dry so he could keep his luxury SUV. We're just asking you to make a small sacrifice for your family, Darlene, Chloe said, her tone shifting from urgent to slightly condescending, as if she were explaining basic math to a child. We're drowning. You don't understand how expensive the world is now. You've been in this little house forever. You don't know what modern bills look like. I let out a soft, gentle laugh. It wasn't bitter. It was the quiet, amused laugh of a woman who has spent 4 decades reading the fine print that people try to hide in the dark. That's funny, I said, my voice smooth and steady. You can't afford daycare on $250,000 a year? Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. She slammed her hand down on the table, the expensive rings on her fingers rattling against the wood. How dare you? How dare you throw our income in our faces? You have absolutely no idea what our expenses are, Darlene. This is exactly why we didn't want to discuss numbers with you. You're completely out of touch with reality. Tyler looked shocked that I even knew the number. Mom, how do you... Tyler, I said, turning my gaze to him. I am a senior escrow officer. When you bought your 4-bedroom colonial in the reserve subdivision last year, who do you think reviewed your closing disclosures? Who do you think co-signed the secondary verification because your debt-to-income ratio was hovering right at the absolute limit allowed by the underwriters? He went pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. And who do you think still gets your old credit card statements and past due notices delivered here because you never bothered to update your billing address for 3 of your high-interest accounts? I continued, my voice remaining entirely calm. I reached over to the small built-in desk in the corner of my kitchen. Resting on a stack of neatly printed papers was a heavy, tarnished brass anchor paperweight, the one my father had given me when he worked the Great Lakes freighters. It was solid, unyielding, and heavy. I lifted the anchor and picked up the 3 sheets of paper beneath it. I laid the documents flat on the table, right next to the wet ring Chloe's glass had left on my mother's lace. I don't know what modern bills look like, Chloe, I asked, looking her dead in the eye. Let's take a look at yours. The 3 sheets of paper didn't look like much. They weren't bound in fancy leather, and they didn't have any corporate logos embossed on the top. They were just standard letter-sized printer sheets, slightly curled at the edges from the damp air in my kitchen, covered in neat rows of numbers I'd printed out from my home computer the night before. But to Chloe, they might as well have been a warrant for her arrest. She stared down at the bright yellow highlighter lines running across the pages. Her manicured finger, with its sparkling 3-carat diamond, hovered just above the paper, trembling slightly. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its polished suburban cadence and turning sharp like dry twigs snapping underfoot. "Where did you get this information? This is private. Tyler, did you give her our bank passwords?" Tyler didn't answer. He was staring at the second page, his face draining of what little color it had left. He recognized the font. It was the exact ledger format used by the Richland County Title and Escrow Office, the very office where I have spent more than half my life making sure people didn't sign away their futures on bad faith promises. Nobody gave me passwords, Chloe, I said, my voice as level and calm as the waters of Charles Mill Lake on a windless July morning. When you're an escrow officer, you learn that people leave a trail of breadcrumbs wherever they go, especially when they're trying to live a life they can't afford. And when those breadcrumbs are mailed directly to my front porch because Tyler was too lazy to change his primary billing address on his old accounts after you moved, I don't need to hack into anything. I just have to open my mailbox. I tapped the top sheet with my index finger, right on a highlighted line that showed a monthly payment of $1,150. Let's start with the Audi, I said softly. You told me you got a great deal on the lease, Tyler. But this statement from Audi Financial Services says you rolled over $4,000 of negative equity from your last vehicle into this one. You're paying over $1,100 a month for a depreciating piece of metal, just so the other moms at the country club preschool see you pull up in something with 4 rings on the grill. That's a business expense, Tyler stammered, his eyes darting toward the window as if wishing he were anywhere else but sitting across from his mother at a cracked linoleum table. I need a reliable car to meet clients, Mom. You don't understand how corporate sales work. Image is everything. Image doesn't pay the groceries when you're 65, son, I replied. I want to take a moment and talk directly to those of you who are reading this right now. If you have ever spent your life clipping coupons, buying the store brand milk, and mending the soles of your shoes with shoe goo just so your child could have the registration fee for Little League, you know the specific kind of ache I was feeling in my chest. You do all of that because you want them to have a better, easier life than you did. But somewhere along the way, if you aren't careful, the ease you gave them turns into entitlement. They start to think that your struggle was just a natural law of the universe, that you were meant to suffer so they could shine. I looked at Tyler, the boy I used to hold against my chest when he had the croup, the boy whose fever I watched over while the snow piled up outside our drafty rental house. He wouldn't look me in the eye. And then we have this, I continued, turning to the second page. The secondary equity line of credit you took out 6 months ago, the one for $45,000. Chloe gasped, her eyes widening as she looked from the paper to Tyler. Tyler? What is she talking about? You told me that money was a bonus from your quarterly performance. You didn't tell her, Tyler? I asked, a small, sad smile touching my lips. You didn't tell your wife that you had to take out a high-interest second lien against your home just to cover the down payment on the club membership and that trip to Cabo you took in August? The one you posted 32 pictures of on Facebook with the caption, "Hard work pays off"? The silence in the kitchen was so absolute that the dripping of the kitchen faucet sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. Drip, drip, drip. You co-signed that secondary loan, Mom, Tyler whispered, his voice cracking. You said you'd help us get into the house. You signed the verification. I did, I said, and the admission felt like a heavy stone sitting in my stomach. I co-signed because you told me you were $50,000 short on the closing costs due to a delay in your commission check. I trusted you. I signed my name, a name that took me 38 years of spotless credit and hard work to build in this county, because I wanted my granddaughter to have a backyard to play in. But I didn't sign up to fund a lifestyle that is nothing but a house of cards. I turned the page over, showing the final spreadsheet. This was the one I had spent 3 hours compiling the night before, sitting at this very table with a cold cup of chamomile tea and my old Texas Instruments calculator. Your gross monthly income is $20,833, I said, reading the numbers off the page. After taxes, 401k contributions, and health insurance, you bring home roughly $14,200 a month. That is more money than your father and I made in an entire year when we first bought this house. Chloe opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a single hand. It wasn't a threatening gesture, just a quiet, firm movement that carried the weight of 40 years of authority. She closed her mouth, her lips forming a thin, bitter line. Your mortgage is $4,850, I said. Your 2 car payments, plus insurance, come to $1,900. Your country club dues are $850. Your credit card minimum payments, mostly from Nordstrom, Williams-Sonoma, and a boutique dog grooming service for a golden retriever you keep locked in a crate 10 hours a day, come to $2,200 a month. You spend $1,200 a month on meal delivery services because you're too busy to cook. And then there are the subscription services, the designer clothes, the organic baby food delivery, and the weekend trips. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, looking at both of them. When you add it all up, you are spending nearly $15,500 a month. You are running a deficit of over $1,300 every single month, Tyler. You aren't drowning because of the cost of daycare. You are drowning because you are trying to live like millionaires on a middle management salary. "We have a certain standard to maintain, Darlene," Chloe snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Tyler is a regional director. We can't just live like we're poor. We have networking events. We have neighbors who expect us to participate in things. You don't understand the pressure." "I don't understand pressure?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, becoming very soft, very dangerous. "Chloe, when my Frank died, I had exactly $412 in our savings account. I had a mortgage payment of $380 due in 2 weeks. I had a 7-year-old boy who needed shoes, and the furnace in the basement was blowing black soot instead of heat. I worked 60 hours a week, and when I came home, I sewed curtains for the neighbors for $5 a window just to keep the lights on. Don't you ever sit in my kitchen, on my mother's lace tablecloth, and tell me I don't understand pressure?" Chloe flinched, looking down at her lap. Her perfectly styled hair fell forward, hiding her face, but I could see her jaw working. My sister Brenda had been right. They hadn't come here to ask for my help. They had come to demand my surrender. They wanted me to cut my own throat, financially speaking, so they wouldn't have to face the reality of their own greed. If I retired early, I would lose nearly $10,000 a year in pension benefits, permanently. That was money I needed to pay my Medicare premiums, my property taxes, and the upkeep on this old house. They wanted me to become a full-time, unpaid nanny for the next 4 years, giving up my freedom, my financial security, and my peace of mind, all so they could keep driving an Audi they couldn't afford. "Mom," Tyler said, his voice pleading now, trying to find the boyish charm he used to use when he wanted $10 for the movies. "We're in trouble. If we don't pay off that secondary line of credit by the end of the year, the interest rate adjustments kick in. It's a variable rate. It's going to jump to 12%. We can't afford that payment. We need that $24,000 we'd save on daycare to pay down the principal. Please, we're family. You're Lily's grandmother." He was using my granddaughter as a shield. He was using my love for that little girl as a weapon to force my hand. I looked over at Lily, who was fast asleep in her stroller, her little thumb tucked into her mouth, completely unaware of the storm raging around her. She was beautiful, innocent, and pure. And she was being raised by 2 people who thought love was something you negotiated on a balance sheet. "I love Lily more than my own life, Tyler," I said, my heart breaking a little as I spoke the words. "But I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm." "So that's it?" Chloe spit out, her eyes flashing with venom as she looked up. "You're just going to say no? You're going to let your own son's family go into foreclosure because you're too selfish to retire 3 years early? You have a pension. You have this house. What do you even spend money on? You're just hoarding it while we suffer." I didn't answer her. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small blue-inked stamp, the one I've used for 3 decades to mark documents as pending review. I set it down on top of the spreadsheets with a soft, heavy thud. "I'm not saying no, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying the quiet, absolute authority of a woman who has spent her life reading the fine print. "I'm saying that if you want my help, we are going to do this on my terms, and you are not going to like them." The kitchen grew very cold as the rain outside turned into a steady, freezing sleet, tapping against the glass like a warning we all chose to ignore. Chloe's eyes darted from the blue rubber stamp to my face, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. She looked like a cornered animal, the kind that tries to puff itself up to look twice its size. "Your terms?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a toxic mix of disbelief and venom. "Who do you think you are, Darlene? You're a clerk. You stamp papers in a dusty county office. You don't get to dictate terms to us." "I am the woman holding the pen, Chloe," I said, my voice remaining as soft and steady as a heartbeat. "And in my world, the person with the pen makes the rules." I reached into my old, worn canvas tote bag resting on the floor beside my chair. I pulled out a black and white marbled composition notebook. The edges were frayed, and the spine was held together by a strip of black electrical tape. I laid it on the oilcloth table next to the spreadsheets. This notebook was my personal ledger, a record I had kept since 1992. It held the exact cost of every gallon of milk, every pair of orthopedic shoes, every roof repair, and every dollar I had ever scraped together to put Tyler through school. It was the physical manifestation of a lifetime of quiet, disciplined sacrifice. "Now, I want you both to listen to me very carefully," I said, looking from my son to his wife. "I know some of you listening to this right now might think I'm being harsh. You might think a mother should just open her arms, take her granddaughter, and let the finances sort themselves out. But if you've ever watched someone you love drown in a pool of their own vanity, you know that throwing them a heavy gold brick isn't going to save them. You have to drag them to the shallow end, even if they scream and kick the whole way." Tyler swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the marbled notebook. "What are the terms, Mom?" "First," I said, tapping the paper, "I will not retire early. I have worked 38 years to secure my full pension, and I will not forfeit 35% of my lifetime security, so you can maintain an illusion of wealth. However, my supervisor has approved a transitional schedule. Starting next month, I am taking my accrued 12 weeks of paid family leave, followed by a restructured 4-day work week. I will watch Lily on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays." Chloe let out a sharp, cynical laugh. 3 days? That doesn't solve our problem, Darlene. We still have to pay for daycare the other 2 days. That's barely a Band-Aid. "It is a complete solution, Chloe, if you do what is necessary," I replied, my eyes locking onto hers until she looked away. "On Mondays and Fridays, Tyler will work from home and care for his daughter. And if his corporate sales job doesn't allow for that, then he will have to adjust his hours, just like I did for 30 years. You will enroll Lily in the local church co-op program for the remaining days. It costs $400 a month, not $2,000. It is clean, safe, and run by retired teachers who actually know how to wipe a child's nose without expecting a tip." Tyler looked down at his hands, his knuckles white. "And the second line of credit, Mom? The variable rate kicks in next month. If we don't pay down the principal, the payment jumps by $600. We can't afford the church program, let alone the mortgage if that happens." "That brings me to my second term," I said. I slid a 2-page document across the table. It was printed on the heavy, cream-colored bond paper we used for official escrow agreements at the title office. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Private Debt Management and Escrow Agreement." "What is this?" Tyler asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It is a legally binding contract," I explained, pointing to the signature lines at the bottom. "You want me to sacrifice my time, my energy, and my peace of mind to bail you out? Then you will surrender financial custody of your household to me for the next 24 months. Chloe stood up so fast, her vinyl chair screeched against the linoleum. "Are you insane? Financial custody? You want us to hand over our money to you? Tyler, tell her she's out of her mind. We are 34-year-old adults." "You may be 34, Chloe, but financially, you are toddlers playing with matches in a warehouse full of fireworks," I said, my voice dropping to a level of cold authority that made her freeze. "Under this agreement, Tyler's primary salary direct deposit will be redirected to a restricted escrow account managed solely by me. I will pay your mortgage, your utilities, your basic groceries, and your insurance directly from this account. You will receive a weekly allowance of $150 each for personal expenses. No more credit cards. They will be surrendered to me tonight, and we will cut them up at this table." "And the Audi?" Tyler asked, his eyes wide with a sudden childlike terror. "The Audi goes back to the dealership on Monday," I said flatly. "You will break the lease. Yes, there will be a penalty, but we will pay it from the liquid savings you have left. You will take the $5,000 remaining in your checking account and buy a used, reliable sedan, a 10-year-old Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla. It will get you to your sales meetings just fine. If your clients judge you by your car, Tyler, then you aren't as good a salesman as you think you are." "This is humiliation," Chloe hissed, her face contorted with rage. "You want to humiliate us. You want to show everyone in town that we failed." "No, Chloe," I said, looking at her with genuine pity. Humiliation is having the sheriff show up on your manicured lawn to stick a foreclosure notice on your front door while your neighbors watch. Humiliation is having your water turned off because you spent the utility money on a designer diaper bag. I am offering you a quiet, private discipline. Nobody in this county needs to know about this agreement except the three of us. Just then, the back door creaked open. The cold, wet draft from the Ohio sleet swept into the kitchen, carrying the sharp scent of damp wool and exhaust. My sister Brenda walked in, shaking her umbrella out on the porch before stepping onto the linoleum. Her yellow school bus driver's cap was damp, and her cheeks were red from the cold. She didn't say a word. She just walked over to the stove, poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, and stood leaning against the counter, her silver ring of school bus keys jingling softly in her pocket. Brenda's presence was a physical reminder of where we came from. She was the sister who had helped me clean office buildings at night when Tyler was a baby. She knew what it meant to work until your knees swelled up like grapefruits. She looked at Tyler, then at Chloe, her sharp eyes taking in the spreadsheets, the contract, and the trembling rage on Chloe's face. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Tyler," Brenda said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Your mother spent 38 years keeping people from losing their homes because they bought things they didn't need with money they didn't have. If I were you, I'd start listening to her. She's the only one in this room who knows how to build a foundation that doesn't wash away in a heavy rain." Tyler looked at his aunt, then back at me. "Mom, if we don't sign this, what happens?" I let out a slow, heavy sigh. This was the moment, the turning point where the mother in me had to step aside and let the escrow officer take the wheel. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I knew that if I softened now, I would lose my son forever to a mountain of debt and regret. "If you don't sign this agreement by 5 o'clock next Friday," I said, my voice cracking slightly with the weight of the words, "I will not re-verify my co-signature on your secondary line of credit. The lender sent the annual verification form to my office yesterday, Tyler. Because of your debt-to-income ratio, they require my active notarized signature to renew the promotional rate. If I don't sign it, the loan default terms kick in. The interest rate will jump to 12%, and the bank will accelerate the debt. They will demand the entire $45,000 within 30 days. Tyler gasped. "Mom, you wouldn't. That would ruin my credit. It could trigger a default on our primary mortgage." "I would?" I said, looking him dead in the eye, though my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces inside my chest. "Because I would rather see you lose that overpriced house now, while you are still young enough to recover, than watch you drag my granddaughter into bankruptcy 5 years from now when you've completely bled me dry. The choice is yours, Tyler. You can swallow your pride, sign this paper, and let me help you rebuild your life. Or you can walk out that door, keep your Audi, and figure out how to pay $45,000 by the end of the month." The silence returned, heavier and colder than before. The only sound was the wind howling against the side of the house, rattling the old wooden storm windows I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years. Chloe looked at Tyler, her eyes pleading with him to fight back, to find a loophole, to use the corporate jargon he used at his office to dismiss his mother's authority. But Tyler knew better. He knew that when Darlene Miller stamps a document pending review, there is no moving forward until every single condition has been met to the letter. He reached out his hand, his fingers brushing against the cold, tarnished brass anchor paperweight. He looked at the heavy cream paper of the contract, then up at me, the realization of his own helplessness finally settling into his eyes. "We need some time to think about this," Chloe said, her voice tight and defensive, though the arrogance had completely drained from her posture. "You have until next Friday at 5, I said, picking up my blue rubber stamp and placing it back into my tote bag. "But if you want me to watch Lily on Tuesday morning, I expect the keys to the Audi and your credit cards to be sitting on this kitchen table by Sunday night." Without another word, Tyler stood up and began to buckle a sleeping Lily back into her stroller, his movements slow, heavy, and defeated. The days between that freezing Wednesday night and Friday afternoon felt like a long, slow walk through a dark forest. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler's face when he was 7 years old, holding a broken plastic fire truck and crying because he thought he'd ruined it forever. I had glued that toy back together with epoxy and a prayer, sitting at the very same kitchen table where I had just laid down the law to him. A mother's heart is a stubborn thing. It wants to protect even when it knows that protection is just a form of slow poisoning. I kept hoping my phone would ring, that Tyler would say, "Mom, we're sorry. We messed up. Help us fix this." I wanted him to choose the hard, honest path of humility. But when you've spent 38 years watching people sign their names on lines they haven't read, you learn to expect the detour before you see the straight road. The call finally came on Friday morning at exactly 10:15. I was sitting at my desk at the title company, the familiar smell of old paper, toner, and damp coats filling the room. "Mom," Tyler's voice came through the receiver. It wasn't the broken, pleading voice of Wednesday night. It had a strange, brittle edge of confidence to it, the kind of tone he used when he was trying to pitch a difficult client on a bad deal. "We've been talking things over. We found a better way to handle the secondary line of credit. We don't need to go through with that restricted escrow setup you talked about. We've worked out a restructuring with Richland Trust downtown. We just need you to come down at noon and sign a quick release of liability. It's a standard form. It'll take 5 minutes." My hand tightened around my vintage fountain pen, the one with the green marbled barrel my husband Frank had given me for our 5th anniversary. "A release of liability, Tyler?" I asked, my voice flat. "Who is the loan officer you're working with?" "His name is Marcus Vance," Tyler said, a little too quickly. "He's a junior vice president. He's great. He says this is a very common way to handle family cosign situations. We'll see you at noon, okay? Don't be late, Mom. Marcus is squeezing us in." After the line went dead, I sat there for a long moment, looking out the window at the gray, slushy streets of Mansfield. I knew Marcus Vance, or rather, I knew his father, Bill Vance, who had spent 30 years trying to sell swampland in Florida to local factory workers before the state licensing board finally pulled his credentials. The apple, as we like to say in Ohio, rarely rolls far from the orchard. I stood up, walked over to my filing cabinet, and pulled out my worn leather portfolio with the brass zipper. The initials DM were faded on the bottom corner, worn away by decades of carrying closing documents to banks, lawyers' offices, and kitchen tables. Inside, I didn't just have the escrow agreement I'd drafted. I had a complete certified copy of Richland Trust's commercial and residential underwriting guidelines, a document I had helped update 3 years ago when our title company renegotiated our master services agreement with them. I know some of you reading this are probably shaking your heads right now. You're thinking, "Darlene, he's your son. Why are you preparing for a battle like he's a stranger?" Let me tell you something I've learned from watching families tear themselves apart over real estate. The people who love you the most are often the ones who think they have the right to steal from you first. They don't call it stealing, of course. They call it family business. They call it an investment in our future. But at the end of the day, if you let them slide, you aren't helping them grow. You're just funding their descent. I loved Tyler too much to let him become a thief in his own home. When I walked into the lobby of Richland Trust at noon, the grand neoclassical pillars and the cold marble floors felt like a cathedral of old money. But underneath the shiny brass and the smell of expensive carpet cleaner, it was just a business. And like any business, it ran on rules. Chloe was already there, sitting on one of the plush leather couches in the waiting area. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat that looked like it had never seen a drop of Ohio slush, and her hair was pulled back into a sleek, perfect ponytail. She didn't look like a woman who was $1,300 in the red every month. She looked like she owned the place. When she saw me walk in, a tiny, triumphant smirk touched the corners of her mouth. "Darlene," she said, rising and offering a brief, cold nod. "Thank you for coming. We're really glad we could find a professional solution to this. It's much cleaner this way." "We'll see, Chloe," I said, keeping my leather portfolio tucked firmly under my arm. Tyler emerged from the back offices with Marcus Vance. Marcus was young, maybe 28, wearing a suit that was a little too blue and a watch that was a little too big. He had that eager, hungry look of a junior officer who was paid on commission and didn't mind cutting a few corners to hit his quarterly volume target. "Mrs. Miller," Marcus said, extending a hand. "A pleasure to meet you. Tyler speaks very highly of your career in escrow. It's always nice to work with an industry veteran." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. shaking his hand with a firm, measured grip. Let's get to it. I have 3 closings scheduled for this afternoon. We walked into Marcus's glass-walled office. On his polished mahogany desk sat a thin blue folder. He opened it, sliding a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a standard Richland Trust release of co-obligor liability. It's very straightforward, Marcus explained, leaning back in his leather chair and tapping a heavy gold pen against his desk. By signing this, you are releasing your secondary security interest in Tyler and Chloe's property. We are rolling the remaining $45,000 of the secondary line of credit into an unsecured personal signature loan under Tyler's name alone. The interest rate is a bit higher, but it completely removes you from the debt. It's a win-win. You get your peace of mind, and they get to keep their home financing intact. I looked down at the paper. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out my reading glasses, and took my time. I didn't rush. When you've read 10,000 deeds, you know that the most dangerous words are the ones they leave out. Marcus, I said softly, my finger tracing the second paragraph. This release is contingent upon the successful funding of the unsecured signature loan, correct? Yes, of course, Marcus smiled. Standard procedure. And what are the underwriting requirements for an unsecured signature loan of $45,000 at this institution? I asked, looking up at him over the rim of my glasses. Marcus blinked, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Well, it's based on debt-to-income ratio, credit score, and verified assets. Tyler's credit is excellent, and his income as a regional director easily qualifies him. Did you run a full debt-to-income verification, Marcus? I asked, my voice as calm as a Sunday morning. Or did you just use the self-reported figures from his auto-populated application? Chloe slammed her Starbucks cup onto Marcus's desk, the hot coffee sloshing against the plastic lid. Darlene, this is ridiculous. Marcus is a professional banker. He doesn't need you auditing his work. Just sign the release so we can get this over with. I'm asking because I care about this bank, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to that quiet, dangerous register. And I care about my son's future. I unzipped my leather portfolio and pulled out 3 documents. I didn't slide them across the desk. I just laid them out in front of me, like a hand of cards. Marcus, I said, pointing to the first document. This is Tyler's active credit card statement from his high-interest Chase account. It shows an outstanding balance of $22,400. It was mailed to my house on Monday because Tyler never updated his address. This debt does not appear on the credit report you pulled yesterday, because Chase only reports balances at the end of the billing cycle, which isn't for another 10 days. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Tyler, who had suddenly turned the color of wet chalk. And this, I continued, pointing to the second document, is the lease agreement for the 2024 Audi Q7. It's a commercial lease, but Tyler is listed as the personal guarantor. The monthly obligation is $1,150. On his loan application here, the one you have on your screen, Marcus, Tyler listed his monthly auto expense as $400. Tyler? Marcus asked, his voice losing its slick, corporate warmth. Is this accurate? Mom, please, Tyler whispered, his eyes pleading. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Tyler, I said, looking at him with a mixture of sorrow and absolute resolve. You did this when you lied on a federal loan application. Marcus, if you fund this unsecured signature loan based on these omitted debts, you are violating Section 1006 of the Title 18 United States Code regarding loan fraud. And since this loan is federally insured, both you and the borrower could face up to 30 years in federal prison. The silence in that small glass office was so heavy you could hear the faint hum of the traffic outside on Main Street. Chloe looked like she wanted to scream, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. But she didn't dare make a sound. Marcus, I said, leaning forward, your father Bill is a nice man, but he never did understand the difference between a loophole and a trap. I've known your senior vice president, Frank Reynolds, since 1984. We used to eat lunch together on the steps of the courthouse when we were both starting out. If I walk down the hall to his office right now and show him these undisclosed liabilities, what do you think he'll do to your commission on this loan? What do you think he'll do to your license? Marcus didn't hesitate. He slid his heavy gold pen back into his pocket and pulled the blue folder toward his chest, his hands shaking slightly. I I think there has been a misunderstanding, Marcus stammered, his face pale. We're going to need to reevaluate this application in light of this new information. I can't process this release today. Thank you, Marcus, I said, standing up and zipping my leather portfolio. I think that's a very wise decision. I turned to look at my son and his wife. Chloe was staring at me, her hands clenched into tight fists in her lap, her eyes burning with a cold, desperate fury. Tyler just sat there, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He looked smaller than he ever had, not like a successful regional director, but like a boy who had finally run out of places to hide. "Sunday night, Tyler," I said, my voice gentle but as unyielding as iron. "The keys and the credit cards, they need to be on my kitchen table by 6 o'clock, or I walk into Frank's office first thing Monday morning." Without waiting for an answer, I turned and walked out of the bank, the sound of my sensible shoes clicking firmly against the marble floor, leaving the wreckage of their illusions behind me. Sunday came, and with it, the kind of stillness that only settles over Ohio after a hard autumn freeze. The sleet had stopped, leaving a thin, glittering glaze of ice over the cracked concrete of my driveway and the branches of the old silver maple in my front yard. Inside, my small kitchen was warm. The radiator in the corner hissed and popped, a familiar, comforting soundtrack to a room that had seen 30 years of Sunday dinners, budget planning, and quiet tears. Brenda was sitting at the far end of the table, her fingers busy with a ball of gray yarn and a pair of wooden knitting needles. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The steady click-click of her needles was her way of telling me she was there, standing watch, ready to be my anchor if my resolve started to drift. On the oilcloth tablecloth, right next to the hand-crocheted lace runner, sat the 2-page private debt management and escrow agreement. Resting on top of it was the tarnished brass anchor paperweight, holding the pages down against the draft that always sneaked in through the kitchen window. At exactly 5 minutes to 6, the headlights of the gray Audi Q7 swept across the kitchen wall, cutting through the dimming twilight. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar dull ache in my lower back. I looked down at my hands, at the small white scars on my knuckles from decades of paper cuts, the stiff joints that ached when the weather turned cold. I was tired. Lord, I was so tired. But as I heard the heavy car doors slam shut outside, I straightened my spine. I adjusted my reading glasses, letting them rest on the bridge of my nose, and waited. The back door opened, and the cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive leather and the sharp, metallic tang of the frozen street. Tyler came in first, carrying Lily's diaper bag. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the yellowing linoleum floor as he stepped into the kitchen. Chloe followed him. Her face was pale, the perfect makeup from Friday afternoon replaced by a tired, drawn look that made her look older than her 34 years. She didn't have her designer purse slung over her shoulder. She held it in both hands, clutching it against her stomach like a shield. Neither of them spoke. The silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Tyler walked slowly to the table. He reached into the pocket of his Patagonia vest, the same vest that had felt like a symbol of his arrogance just a few days ago, and pulled out a heavy, black key fob with the shiny silver Audi rings. He set it down on the table. It made a dull, heavy clack as it hit the wood. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. With trembling fingers, he slid out 4 shiny pieces of plastic: a gold Chase credit card, a black Nordstrom card, a silver Williams-Sonoma Visa, and a corporate American Express. He laid them in a neat row next to the car key. Chloe stepped forward, her jaw tight, her eyes rimmed with red. She opened her designer bag, reached inside, and pulled out her own cards. 3 of them, including a platinum boutique card that I knew carried a 24% interest rate. She placed them on the table with a sharp, angry flick of her wrist. "There," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "Are you happy now, Darlene? You've stripped us of everything. You've turned my husband into a child." "I haven't turned him into anything, Chloe," I said, my voice soft, steady, and devoid of any triumph. "I am helping him become a father who can look his daughter in the eye without lying about what he can afford." I reached into the kitchen drawer behind me and pulled out my heavy black-handled dressmaker shears. the ones my mother had used to cut denim and canvas when we were girls. I picked up the gold chase card first. Snip. The sound of the heavy plastic snapping in two was surprisingly loud in the quiet kitchen. I didn't look at their faces as I cut the cards, one by one, into tiny, useless diagonals. I let the pieces fall into a small blue glass jar that sat on the counter, the jar where I used to keep spare buttons and safety pins. When I was finished, I set the shears down and slid the cream-colored agreement toward my son. "Sign it, Tyler," I said gently, "and then we start the real work." He picked up my vintage green marbled fountain pen. His hand shook slightly as he wrote his name on the line marked Debtor Co Obligor. Chloe took the pen from him, her movement stiff and hostile, and scribbled her signature beneath his. "I want to stop here for a moment and speak directly to those of you who are holding your breath right now. I know there are mothers reading this who are sitting at their own kitchen tables, looking at bills they can't pay because they've spent years bailing out adult children who never learned the value of $1. You think that by giving them more, you are showing them love. But I am telling you, looking you straight in the eye, sometimes the greatest act of love you can offer is a hard, unyielding no. It hurts. It feels like a physical tear in your chest to see your child look at you with anger and defeat. But if you don't stand firm, who will teach them how to stand? The next 12 months were not easy. They were, in fact, some of the hardest months of my life. On Monday morning, Tyler and I drove the Audi back to the dealership in Canton. It cost $4,500 to break the lease, a bitter pill that we paid directly from their remaining liquid savings. That afternoon, we took a bus to a local used car lot, and Tyler bought a 7-year-old silver Toyota Camry with 88,000 miles on the odometer. It had a small dent on the rear passenger door and smelled faintly of pine air freshener, but the engine was solid and the payment was $0. Under the terms of our agreement, Tyler's salary direct deposit was redirected to a restricted escrow account at the Mansfield Credit Union, an account that required my dual signature for any withdrawal over $50. Every 2 weeks when his check cleared, I sat at my kitchen table with my marbled notebook and paid their mortgage, their utilities, the church co-op daycare fee, and the monthly principal payment on that high-interest secondary line of credit. I gave Tyler and Chloe each a weekly allowance of $150 in cash, no exceptions, no emergency transfers. If they wanted to go out to eat, they had to save it from their allowance. If Chloe wanted her hair highlighted, she had to wait until she had enough physical bills tucked into her dresser drawer to pay for it. The first 3 months, Chloe wouldn't speak to me when she dropped Lily off on Tuesday mornings. She would stand on my porch, hand over the diaper bag without making eye contact, and turn on her heel to walk back to her used sedan. I didn't push her. I didn't try to force a warmth that wasn't there. I just took Lily into my arms, breathed in the sweet, milky scent of her hair, and closed the door. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays became my sanctuary. For 12 weeks, during my paid family leave, and then during my restructured 4-day work weeks, Lily and I lived a quiet, simple life. We didn't go to expensive play gyms or high-end baby music classes. We walked to the local park, watched the ducks on the pond, and spent afternoons on my living room rug playing with wooden blocks that had belonged to Tyler when he was a boy. I taught her how to roll dough on the kitchen table, her little hands covered in flour, her giggles filling the drafty old house with a joy I hadn't felt since Frank died. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with Tyler. About 6 months into the agreement, he came to pick Lily up on a rainy Thursday evening. Instead of waiting in the car with the engine running, he came inside. He stood in the kitchen, watching his daughter sit on the floor, contentedly stacking plastic Tupperware containers I'd pulled from the cabinet. "She doesn't miss the country club playground, does she?" Tyler asked, his voice low. His shoulders slumped in a way that wasn't defeated anymore, just relaxed. "Children don't care about status, Tyler," I said, stirring a pot of chicken noodle soup on the stove. "They care about presence. She has you now. She has a father who isn't working 80 hours a week just to pay for a car he doesn't own." He walked over, leaned his head against my shoulder for a brief, quiet second, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." It wasn't a grand, dramatic reconciliation. There were no tears, no long confessions of guilt, but it was a bridge. A small, sturdy bridge built on the cold, hard truth of numbers and the quiet strength of a mother who refused to let her son ruin himself. By the time the 2nd October rolled around, the secondary line of credit was completely paid off. The $45,000 debt that had threatened to drag them into foreclosure was gone, wiped out by 12 months of disciplined, aggressive payments and a lifestyle that had been stripped down to the beautiful, necessary basics. Their credit score was intact. Their mortgage was current. And for the first time in 5 years, Tyler and Chloe had $3,000 in a real savings account. Money they had saved dollar by dollar from their monthly budget. Last Sunday, we had dinner at my house. It was the first time in a year that Chloe sat at my table and actually smiled. She had brought a homemade apple pie, the crust slightly burnt at the edges, but made with apples she and Lily had picked themselves at a local orchard. We sat around the old oilcloth table, the radiator popping in the corner, the scent of cinnamon and roasted chicken filling the air. Tyler was sitting next to his wife, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He didn't look like a high-powered regional director trying to impress the neighbors anymore. He looked like a man who had found his footing on solid ground. "We're looking at a small ranch house over in the township," Chloe said, her voice quiet, her eyes meeting mine without any of the old venom. "It's about half the size of our current place, but the school district is wonderful, and the property taxes are a third of what we're paying now. We think we're ready to sell the colonial." I looked at her, then at my son, and then at Lily, who was happily eating a piece of apple pie with her fingers, leaving sticky smudges on my mother's lace runner. "I think that's a beautiful idea, Chloe," I said, reaching over to pat her hand. My sister Brenda caught my eye from across the room, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her face as she took a sip of her Folgers. She didn't say a word, but her knitting needles were quiet now, resting in her lap. I know my son will never fully understand the weight of what I did. He will never know the sleepless nights I spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had pushed him too far, if I had broken the fragile bond between us forever. But as I watched him wipe a smudge of pie from his daughter's cheek, his face softened by a peace that money could never buy, I knew that the foundation we had built over this hard, disciplined year would hold long after I was gone. Because at the end of the day, love isn't about making things easy. It isn't about funding an illusion or sacrificing your own peace to keep up appearances. Love is a gift, not a line item in a budget. And sometimes the only way to save the people you love is to hold the line until they learn how to stand on their own.